Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. Patrick Darms.
And your co-host, Anton Paras here.
We have a longtime favorite guest returning to the podcast, Paul Kind. Welcome back.
Welcome back, Paul.
Bless you for that very kind introduction. And yeah, great to be here again, and especially to cover this film. Very excited.
One of your favorites, right?
Without a doubt. Yes, the cat's out of the bag. I just absolutely love this film. And I'm so glad that someone on this podcast has seen it for the first time.
Oh yeah, I wonder who that is.
But it's not me, because I too consider this to be one of my favorite films. You know, once in a while, Anton, we cover a movie that maybe doesn't traditionally fit the criteria for the podcast. As far as I can tell, this film had a decent amount of hype, and it was very well received when it came out in late 1968. It's sort of a classic, which we'll get to. We'll talk about it. It's a classic to me and Paul and others. I don't know if it's generally seen as a classic. We're covering it, number one, because we want to. Number two, we hope that it will create some awareness for it, because I've always thought of this film as underrated. Those who have seen it think very highly of it, but it does not seem to have the legacy that a lot of other World War II movies have.
And I just wanted to add one additional point for any listeners that aren't familiar. This is an underrated but very influential film. And I'm really excited to kind of talk at the different points where other filmmakers, other properties in pop culture have really taken from this film.
Yeah. Not just film, but well, we don't have to bury the lead here. Yeah. Call of Duty took a great deal from this.
Oh, yeah.
And what was the other one?
Wolfenstein. Yeah. And any Hideo Kojima fans, Metal Gear Solid takes a lot from this as well.
I could see that. Let's get right into it then, Anton. Please intro this.
A crack team of Allied soldiers stages a daring rescue during World War II. A U.S. general is being held captive in an imposing castle fort high in the Bavarian Alps. The audacious plan calls for Major John Smith, Lieutenant Morris Schaefer, and other operatives to parachute down wearing German disguises. They'll penetrate the mountain outpost while undercover operatives assist them from within. But their mission changes when they discover that there's a traitor in their midst. Released on December 4th, 1968 by MGM, directed by Brian G. Hutton, screenplay by Alistair MacLean, starring Richard Burton, Clint Eastwood, Mary Ure, Patrick Wymark, Michael Hordem, and Ingrid Pitt, with a budget at $6.2 million, so that's $56 million adjusted for inflation, at a box office of $21 million, $189 million adjusted for inflation. The film today, Where Eagles Dare.
Broadsword calling Danny Boy. Broadsword calling Danny Boy. One of my all-time favorite war movies, and movies in general. This really is probably one of my 50 favorite movies.
Some of the best gun choreography, gun warfare choreography.
Yeah. A lot of people get killed in this movie. It has a very high body count.
Does not turn away from like axes to the body.
No. I think if it were made today, you would probably see the pickaxe go through a guy's head instead of just in their arm.
Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of really cool things about this film, but I mean, you started to touch on it, Pat. Why are we even talking about this film today?
I want to bring awareness to it. Like I said, I don't think that it technically fits the criteria for why wasn't it better. But since this is my podcast, I can cover whatever movies I damn well please.
It definitely fits a criteria of why aren't more people talking about it? And I feel like we do have the platform to be able to kind of spread the word because, my goodness, it deserves the praise, right?
Yeah, I'm not spoiling anything. I'm going to be giving this a very high rating. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie. I watched it as a kid a lot when it was on Turner Classic Movies. Either my dad or my grandfather introduced this to me at a very young age, because this was made in an era where pretty much anything that wasn't rated R was more or less appropriate for a kid to watch. Now, obviously, a lot of what happens in this movie would go over a young kid's head, and I can't say that I understood everything about the plot the first time I saw it. I was probably like 6 or 7 years old when I first saw this, but I loved it. This was my introduction to Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. It's one of those movies that I saw a lot as a kid, and it never fell off my radar. I always kept watching it. It was on cable, like I said, to either Turner Classic Movies or AMC back in the day. And then I owned it on DVD and I own it on Blu-ray. That's how highly I think of this film. And if I was going to sell this film to anybody who has never seen it, like the way I summed it up to you was Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood doing really cool commando shit.
And that's a good sell. Like that is a very good sell.
Yeah, if anyone listening right now, if you haven't seen this film, if that doesn't get you interested in this film, I can't help you. Paul.
Yes.
You were over the moon to cover this movie. Why?
Well, because unfortunately I think I was old enough, not necessarily to see it on its first release, but definitely on its second release, which would have been early 70s. And to have a film where you as a kid watched these action sequences and you just wanted to emulate them the moment you got home. Like you say, I think the plot went way over my head, but at the time you just wanted to be either Clint Eastwood or Richard Burton. And it was just a fantastic film and very exciting. It's that kind of classic rip-roaring, epic action war movie. It never stopped. From the moment the film started to the very end, it just kept moving. There was no time to pause for contemplation. You just kind of carried on to the next scene, the next element, the next plot point. The stunts themselves were incredible. It was such a well-grounded film. A lot of set pieces that were actually filmed in Austria, in the snow. Every time I watch that film, I always feel cold. And you feel, you feel the pressure these guys are on. And, I just really, really loved it. And it's one of those uncanny films. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, the broadsword calling Danny Boy. There are so many quotable parts in this movie. Me and my wife do it all the time. So we're always still trying to discuss, is the cathedral on the other side of the square? Or if I'm asked to do something, I exclaim, "This is preposterous!"
Oh my gosh!
Or if
Demo Monocle.
That's it, yeah. And I use the classic broadsword calling Danny Boy if basically either one of us is not listening to the other person. So, and I have, like you, Pat, I have the DVD. I've got a recording on effectively my TiVo box here. But even if it's on telly, I'll just sit and watch it. And it never gets boring for me. It's just one of those unique films. And the mystery for me is why it's not as popular as it should be. And I still don't know why. I have a theory that it's because it's a war movie. Maybe war movies are only considered if they're more serious, and whereas this one is just pure action adventure, like a boy's own story. So maybe that's why it's not considered a great. I don't know.
That's a good observation. Mm-hmm. You might be onto something. You make a really good point. The serious tone should not have a monopoly on war movies. Now, I'm not saying war movies should be goofy and like parody, and I don't like those types of war movies, but I think the movie industry has gotten away from the concept of the quote-unquote entertaining war movie, at least for mainstream releases. I know there's all sorts of streaming-only content that might meet the criteria of this type of film, but you're right, Paul. It's like I bring this up to a lot of people. A lot of people just haven't seen this movie, and I want them to.
And I feel like we're passing the torch on to Anton, and hopefully the word will spread.
Yes, I definitely feel compelled to let others know.
You hadn't seen this, Anton. Why not?
It's a really good question. I love Clint Eastwood. He's one of my all-time favorite actors and directors. So when I look at his filmography, and especially what he's gone on to direct, this makes complete sense that, he was in this. And I feel like it's just something that has never come up. So I feel like I definitely missed the train, but I'm glad that it circled back at a certain
you
point,
didn't
and I
miss
was
it.
able
No,
to.
you got on. It's fine.
I was gonna say, thankfully, I was able to catch it.
Yeah,
So
you caught it.
yeah.
Is it a film that gets a lot of airplay in the US?
It did when I was a kid.
I was gonna say, I think that it's with any classic film, there's a window for distribution where eventually it becomes a bit too niche. Like, for example, getting put on Turner Classic Films, I think, is a bit of
There's a stigma.
and like it's just not going to go to a mass audience at that point.
If you're not a film buff, anything on Turner Classic Movies could easily be dismissed as like, oh, it's just like an old movie.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a ridiculous thing to say, but there is a stigma associated with it.
And I feel like with that, because there's been a movement away from typical broadcast TV or even going to channels like Turner Classic Films, the chance to see films like this is becoming less and less available, in which case you get lucky if it's on a streaming platform and you can catch it, or you kind of have to look out for it because you really enjoy the genre. And I feel like there has to be that other option of now active distribution and recommendation from folks like us because of kind of lack of avenues to really get this recommended on a daily basis.
I think another thing too, which hasn't helped this film, is I'm sure someone will write in and tell me that I'm wrong about this. I don't recall ever having seen it on Netflix or any other streaming service, because I would have watched it if I saw it on there. But it is one of those films where if I hadn't had it on Blu-ray, there just wouldn't have been a lot of opportunity for me to watch it, in the past 15 years or so, because, I don't have cable TV. So I'm sure that's part of it too.
Yeah, it's a shame because there's already lack of a avenue for not just like classic films like this, but even just any film to get redistribution to a wider audience outside of streaming. And less people are on cable now. One of the things that I love is there's actually here in Palo Alto, California, there's a independent movie theater that shows classic films. It's their thing. So I'm going to go see. Maybe they put this on their regular scheduled programming, because, man, I'd love to see this on the silver screen.
I have one dream. I have a few dreams, but one of my major dreams, if I won a little bit of money, was to own an independent cinema, and this would be my premiere film at the very beginning. And I could talk for about 20 minutes about the making of the film and then release it to the audience. I think it's an ideal film because, for some reason here in the UK, we have a channel called Channel 5, and it must tap into a certain audience because it's repeated so often. But on a Sunday between 5 o'clock and like 9 o'clock, or around that kind of time zone, constantly. So it must be tapping into a certain audience. Maybe it's just old people like me, but I hope that somehow some days younger people would see this film and appreciate it, because I don't think it's dated that much particularly either.
I don't think it is either. I am willing to bet if you showed this film to anyone, younger or older, they'd like it.
Yeah, it's you can appreciate all the action and the guns and the explosions as a young kid, and then the nuance as you get older, like, no doubt.
Yeah, it's good dated, right? There's a couple shots here or there, like the rear projection stuff. You're like, well, that looks like an older film. But I think the reason why it holds up, which we'll talk more about in the discussion, is none of the dialogue is dated. There's no weird scene where someone says something like racial or sexist, or you know what I mean? There's nothing like that in this film.
Yeah.
The acting delivery too, it's not. I feel like Richard Burton in some performances is a bit more operatic or almost Shakespearean, but in this case, like, fits in very like within the period, but not feeling out of place.
Because he's a spy. He's undercover. He can't overdo it. By the way, I just looked it up. It is only available to stream on Apple TV right now, which, that's not a widely used streaming service.
All right, Pat, are we going to have to open our own movie theater?
I would love to do that.
Wouldn't that be so fun? The Why Wasn't It Better movie theater?
Oh, yeah.
We probably have to call it something else.
Yeah. I mean, would it probably go out of business? Yes, but
But you know what? If
Hey.
it's funded by, it becomes a landmark, a public landmark, and they're like, we're going to subsidize your rent, keep it open, we're good.
I'm down with that.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people would show up for Titan AE.
No, but for some reason, a lot of people are going to show up for Ants. So
Yeah, go figure. Really quick, because I want to touch on this, because I have this written down in my notes. Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood, right?
Mhm.
This is a unique film for a couple different reasons, but I think the biggest one, we have two legends of the screen, neither of whom were at the wrong point in their careers. Paul and I were talking about this before you got on, Anton. Eastwood was on the come up, right? He had done some of the spaghetti western stuff, but I think this was just before he was like a megastar, right? This was before Dirty Harry. This is before he got into directing. So he was still an up and comer, but he would have been a really famous face on the screen in 1968, right? Then you have Richard Burton, who at that point was a living legend. He had been doing his thing on stage and on screen since the 40s. But unlike another film that we covered earlier on the podcast, Anton, this is before Burton is washed up. He's still in his prime. He doesn't look past it. He was only a couple years away from looking past it. But the point is, you have these two guys at they're passing each other at just the right points of their careers, and that's why it's so satisfying to see them on screen together.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not a coincidence this was Richard Burton's last successful film at the American box office. He didn't have a lot of hits after this. You know, the 70s, I mean, frankly, it probably goes without saying if you're familiar with Burton, the alcoholism was really catching up to him.
Yeah, and we talked about kind of the tail end of his career on earlier episodes.
Yeah, Exorcist 2, where it was kind of sad.
Yeah.
You know, here's a shock for you, Anton. He's only 5 years older than Eastwood.
But he's so fit, he was able to scale a mountain.
Yeah, he was, yeah. Really quick, what are our favorite World War II films before we get into the production history?
Saving Private Ryan comes to mind. Bridge Over River Kwai.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia is really great.
It's not World War II.
Good point.
Sorry,
you're right.
Yep, sorry, Paul. It doesn't count.
The Great Escape, obviously.
Tora.
Hell yeah, Tora. Longest Day.
Kelly's Heroes.
Good one.
Same director.
Anton, you said Bridge on the River Kwai. I put Dunkirk on my list. It's a pretty awesome movie. Guns of Navarone, another adaptation of an Alistair MacLean novel. You guys ever see Downfall?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times has that been memed over the years?
A lot, yeah.
But, well, I mean, what a classic turn. I mean, it was just an intense, was it about 3 hour film? It's quite a long film, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
But so well put together.
Have you seen Conspiracy, the HBO movie about the Wannsee Conference? Kenneth Branagh, Stanley Tucci.
No.
Enemy at the Gates.
It's good.
Yeah.
Schindler's List, technically a World War II movie.
Technically a World War II movie, very different.
Got to be near the top of the list.
Yeah.
I mean, is it something I ever want to watch regularly? Not at all, but it's got to be on the list.
I mean, purely for the flight sequences, you got Battle of Britain, but as a general story, it was a bit flat.
Yeah, that's on our list too, Paul, to cover.
I have to put both Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima.
They're really good. We're going to be covering those.
They're long, though.
I have A Bridge Too Far on the list. I don't think it's a great movie, but I enjoy it for the cast. But it's a flawed film. I mean, Paul. I think you'd like to be on that episode probably if I know you well, which I do.
Yeah. It actually reminded me of 1917, where sometimes because all these stars were doing their star turn, it kind of interrupted the narrative because you're going, oh, there's Sean Connery, oh, there's Patrick O'Neill, there's Richard Burton, Richard Attenborough, etc. So it was a bit jarring at times. But anyway, we'll save that.
It's definitely a contest to see who has the strongest English accent, and I think Edward Fox wins.
Without a doubt.
This will be a day your grandchildren will remember. I love Edward Fox. Oh, Oppenheimer. It has to be on the list now. That's a World War II movie, right?
Yeah. It's with, I don't think, a single scene in the war.
No,
but a pivotal, important
part. It's like it's a cool, like the Imitation Game is on my list. I really like that movie.
Forgot
It's a
about
World War
that
II
one.
movie.
Doctor
And-
Strange was in it. That's right.
That's right. Have either of you seen Operation Mincemeat? That's a newer movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who was that
Yeah.
one?
That was, what's it, McFadden, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I really liked it.
Yeah, it's a fun cast.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I have Band of Brothers on here as a asterisk because it's a series.
Not a movie, but it is essential to World War II.
Right.
A totally, like, this is not a movie, but an experience. Best museum I've ever been to in my life for just how immersive it is was the World War II Museum in New Orleans.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's like, not only does it have all the memorabilia, the history, the technology to kind of bring you to kind of droves of information on every subject matter across every battle, every faction. It fully immerses you into whatever you're in the Pacific Theater, you're in Northern Africa. They completely actually have full sets within the museum where you kind of feel like you're within those different areas. Pat, when you went, did you see like the film that they made?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, I think it's Tom Hanks narrating it.
Yep.
It gives me chills thinking about it. It's so good.
Yeah, well worth a visit, Paul. I just don't go to New Orleans in the summer.
No, I've been to New Orleans, but it was in July, which was a real mistake.
Yeah, it's one of the hottest places ever.
Yeah. That was also when I went, and actually going to the museum was the reprieve from the heat.
One for the list. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence.
Oh my goodness! Shouts out David Bowie.
Yep, shouts out. I think from the same year. I should have mentioned this earlier. Das Boot.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Classic.
Have either of you seen Masters of the Air? This Apple series that Spielberg is in. Is it any good?
I would say it was interesting, but I didn't necessarily feel like
you're trying not to say no. I
think they tried to weave a story in there about these characters, but really you wanted to feel what it must have been like to have been flying in those planes with minimal amount of ways to defend yourself and the high rate of which deaths occurred. And I just felt it sort of struggled to make that particular point, and it got a little bit more into the sort of the individuals. Whereas I think Band of Brothers, did such a great job of almost making you feel like the experience of a soldier on the ground during war, and I felt that did a lot better job. But I think that was such a high bar to try and reach. So it's worth seeing. I wouldn't say it's going to set the world on fire.
I'll check it out. I mean, anything Spielberg is associated with, I have a passing interest in at least. That was a long intro.
Yep.
Anything to add before we start the production history?
Let's jump in.
All right. So the 1960s was a time when World War II movies were extremely popular. Almost everything that Alistair MacLean was publishing was getting a film adaptation. Guns of Navarone is by far the most successful of these. Ice Station Zebra would come out the same year as this film, Where Eagles Dare. Sometime around 1966, film producer Elliot Kastner contacted MacLean and requested an adventure story filled with mystery, suspense, and action, something that he could adapt into a film. Within 6 weeks, MacLean delivered a script titled Castle of Eagles. Kastner hated this title and chose Where Eagles Dare instead. The title is from Act 1, Scene 2, line 71 of William Shakespeare's Richard III, quote, "The world is grown so bad that wrens make prey where eagles dare not perch," end quote. Like virtually all of MacLean's works, Where Eagles Dare features his trademark secret traitor who must be unmasked by the end. In July of 1966, Kastner and his producing partner Jerry Gershwin announced that they had purchased 5 scripts from MacLean, starting with Where Eagles Dare and When 8 Bells Toll. MacLean published the novel in 1967. Now, this is a bit odd because the film is technically not based on the novel. MacLean wrote this script first. This is kind of a rarity for the podcast stuff that we cover, Anton. I don't think we've come across this before, where someone was writing a novel and a screenplay separately, and it's not really based on the novel, but the novel came out before it. It's very weird.
It is very weird, but we have heard a lot of weird things on the podcast, so...
Yeah, we have. As far as weirdness goes, this is not that weird.
Yeah, this is fine.
The casting what-ifs for this film are pretty big. At one point, the producers thought that Marlon Brando was going to play the role of Lieutenant Schaefer. Nicole Williamson was in discussion to play Major Smith. Some names who were also in discussion to direct, you'll like this, David Lean, John Huston, Carol Reed. But ultimately, this film ended up being directed by Brian Hutton, who had just made Saul Madrid for the producers. I'm going to assume he was a lot cheaper than the three names that I just mentioned. Hutton would direct Eastwood again a few years later in Kelly's Heroes. That one's for you, Paul.
Thank you.
Quick sidebar. I cannot see David Lean directing this. He only did stuff that, he developed himself. I don't see a scenario where he directs somebody else's, sort of pulpy World War II movie. I don't think that's realistic.
It would have been a very different kind of film.
Yeah, it would have been 3.5 hours instead of 2.5.
It would have been gorgeous.
Would have been awesome.
But would it have had the same battle sequences? No.
Nope. Burton later said, quote, "I decided to do the picture because Elizabeth's two sons said they were fed up with me making films where they weren't allowed to see or in where I get killed. They wanted me to kill a few people instead," end quote. So Richard Burton approached Elliot Kastner and, quote, asked him if he had some superhero stuff for me where I don't get killed in the end, end quote. Burton was also in the need of a hit. His previous two films, Dr. Faustus and The Comedians, had both been flops. He was paid $1.2 million to appear in this film. That is the equivalent of $10 million in today's money. The part of Lieutenant Morris Schaefer was offered to Lee Marvin, but he declined, telling the producers they were about 4 years too late. He had already starred in The Dirty Dozen the year before, which he had not liked. Although it made him a huge star, he did not want to return to that type of movie. Clint Eastwood was reluctant to receive second billing to Burton, but he agreed after being paid $800,000. That's about $7.2 million in today's money. He took the part on the advice of his agent, who felt that it would be interesting to see his client appear with someone with seniority. I just want to say, Clint Eastwood, thank you for listening to your agent. Great
Good
decision.
Good call.
Yeah.
The two stars got along very well on set, although Eastwood felt the script was terrible and, quote, all exposition and complications, end quote. And according to Darren Nesbitt, who played the Gestapo Major von Hoppen, Eastwood requested that he be given less dialogue. Most of Schaefer's lines were given to Richard Burton, while Eastwood handled most of the action scenes. A Junkers Ju-52 used in this movie, that's a plane, by the way, was still in use with the Swiss Air Force at the time. The Swiss also supplied the T-6 Texan trainers to pose as German fighters.
So filming lasted from January to July 1968. It was shot on location in Austria and Bavaria. The Schloss Adler is actually the Schloss Hohenwerfen in Austria. At the time of filming, the castle was being used as a police training camp. That would have been one of the fun police academy films. There are no cable cars near Schloss Hohenwerfen, hence the cable car shooting was done somewhere else. For the scenes featuring the castle and the cable car together, scale models were used. This is one of the first movies to use front projection. Specifically, this technology enabled filming of the scenes where the actors are on top of the cable car. Visitors to the set included Burton's wife, Elizabeth Taylor, and Robert Shaw, who was then married to Mary Ure. The filming was delayed due to the adverse weather in Austria. Shooting took place in winter and early spring of 1968, and the crew had to contend with blizzards, sub-zero temperatures, and potential avalanches. Further delays were incurred when Richard Burton, well known for his drinking binges, disappeared for several days with his friends Peter O'Toole, Trevor Howard, and Richard Harris. I'm sure those are a few stories. Darren Nesbitt, who plays a Gestapo officer, observed that Burton was drinking as many as 4 bottles of vodka per day. Nesbitt was...
How?
Nesbitt was temporarily blinded by the blood squib while filming the scene where his character is killed. Stuntman Alf Joint stated that at one point during production, Burton was so drunk that he knocked himself out while filming, and Joint had to quickly fill in for him. Joint is noteworthy for playing the Mexican thug who fights James Bond in the pre-title sequence of Goldfinger. Over 30,000 rounds of blank ammunition were fired during the filming. Eastwood jokingly referred to this as the, quote, where doubles dare, end quote, due to the sheer amount of stunts that required the use of doubles. As part of his deal with MGM, Clint Eastwood took delivery of a Norton P11 motorcycle, which he tested at Brands Hatch Racetrack, accompanied by Ingris Pitt, something that he had been forbidden from doing by Kastner for insurance purposes in case of injury or worse. The film made back its budget in North America, but was a bigger success overseas. The film currently stands at an 84% Rotten Tomatoes score. Now, that is our production history for Where Eagles Dare. We will jump into our reason for why it wasn't better after this commercial break.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. Now that we're back, there is no reason why this wasn't better. We love this movie. But let's
it's so
start
good.
with the plot. Because I have to say, as much as I love this film, and I do, I think I had to see this a couple times before the plot fully clicked with me. Now, that could have been due to the fact that I was a kid at the time. Maybe I was stupid at the time. But Anton, I told you to watch this twice to prepare for this. Not because I think you're stupid, but I just think there's some complexities in the plot that are best appreciated when you see this movie more than once.
So it's really interesting having seen this for the first time after having seen so many films that I can point at and say, wow, like this inspired those plots like very closely. One of the films we talk about is Inglourious Bastards. And when I kind of think of that plot and the influence of plot twists there, the usage of kind of deception across characters in that film, I see so many parallels, and I think like that helped me like subconsciously watching it for the first time, because actually I felt like it was surprising, but it felt very natural the way that you learn everything, but it is very satisfying watching it the second time knowing what to expect.
Yeah, it's a good observation. I think the plot is complex, but it does make sense.
Well, let's think of it from like the core elements. It's a secret mission that is built on just retrieving information, right?
Yes.
So then everything is built on deception to ensure that the prime directive is never revealed.
And I think why it makes sense is upon repeated viewings, you notice the writing is not confusing in the sense that it's poorly written. They are deliberately keeping you guessing the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, Anton, the conference room scene, when he tells Schaefer to drop his gun and he introduces himself as Johann Schmidt, was part of you like, is he a double agent?
I really didn't want him to be, but because of all the guessing, it wouldn't have shocked me if he was, because he played it so well, honestly.
Yeah, he was running game.
Yeah, and I think that in a lesser movie, it could have come off as very cheesy, and you would have known immediately, like, oh, there's no way he's a bad guy.
So I completely agree with what both of you say. I think if you were to take a step back, which I never do on this movie because I just simply enjoy it, a lot of things had to happen for them to be in a situation that Burton's character could retrieve the information he needed. It required things to connect to get those guys in a room with those generals that could verify the notebooks, for him to be able to solicit an escape. If you were to take a step back and go, okay, I'm back in the UK and I need to find out if these guys are a double agent, what's the most convoluted way I could possibly do this? I don't think you could find a better way of doing it. It's like, yeah, we need to break into a castle. We need to fly someone in to crash land, to be taken to this castle, for us to then organize a secret rescue mission, to have these three guys delivered to the castle, for me to be able to interrogate them, for some German to qualify that the names they've given on that list are correct German agents, and the top guy in Britain who is their secret agent, and then get out. That is seriously complicated, and at any point it could go horribly wrong. But despite that, it really, really works.
None of it feels contrived.
No, that's the beauty of it.
I don't know quite how they did it, but it really doesn't feel contrived. I've seen this movie so many times. They set up every little thing in the first half of the movie. Every single thing that gets set up, there's a payoff to. And that's why I don't mind this long runtime. I think it's paced really well because it's 155 minutes. There is not a single wasted minute of screen time. Everything that Burton's character does every line of dialogue that gets said pays off in the second half of the movie.
Yeah, it's not complex for complex sake. It doesn't feel like a waste of energy trying to understand or trying to enjoy the complexity of their plan and the mission. I actually compare this to Diamonds Are Forever. And then like I know we're laughing at it.
Polar opposite.
But that is like a really good example of, I feel like they had to almost work backward and continuously add layers to the plot to make it feel more complex, versus how do you weave a complex plot together to then unravel in a more satisfying way. And I feel like this just felt very natural in that sense. But, for it to feel natural just means they did such a great job.
The mystery feels natural too, because from the very second they parachute into Germany, they introduce the fact that one of them gets murdered, right? Burton, Smith, his character's name is Smith.
Mm-hmm.
He finds the body. They do a real good job of showing that this was not an accident. He wasn't killed in the parachute drop. Someone murdered him. So he doesn't trust anyone from Schaefer. He doesn't trust anyone except Schaefer. Nothing is as it seems. And then you see him up to stuff. And then real quick, even before that, we don't know her name at the time, Maria, she parachutes out of the plane separately, unbeknownst to everybody else except Smith. So you have all these like mysterious stuff going on. You're not really sure how they're all going to connect. And at the end, they all come together.
One of the most badass female characters in film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was going to be one of my points, was the fact, if you think about it, most female roles up to that point were just added almost from a male gaze point of view. They never really contributed to the plot. And here you have a woman or a character that really commits and is part of the plot. What she has to accomplish is really important. Mm-hmm. She never looks like she's weak at any point. The only time she kind of slightly breaks is when they talk about the cathedral being on the right or the left side of the square, and you can see her nerves starting to go, which is quite reasonable. But she ends up like shooting lots of Nazis. I mean, how many films do you see in the 60s, probably even the 70s, that women were shooting machine guns? It was incredibly rare. So she really paved the way, I think, that character.
Yeah, it just totally comes off as capable, and they show you why you can believe she's such a badass with her decision making, like you said, just how her ability to shoot down Nazis.
She's the MVP of it, because if she doesn't get into the castle, the plan won't work at all. The entire thing hinges on her being able to penetrate the castle with the false papers. So if she wasn't able to, the mission is a complete failure. Although I guess you could say about any part of the mission, if any specific thing didn't go right, the mission would fail.
Yeah. Dang, that's nuts.
But they really do keep you in suspense. And Anton, I'm going to bring that scene up again. Like when he tells Schaefer to drop the gun in the conference room, you're like, what is going on? What is going on? But you're not angry at the confusion. Like, he's been running game the whole movie. He's been a step ahead of everything the whole movie, that you're rooting for him. So you're like, all right, he must be up to something else.
I mean, doesn't Clint Eastwood sell that scene
perfectly?
Just because of his reaction, you start to guess.
Because it all leads back to when they're at the guest house drinking. Smith tells him what the mission is about, but the film very cleverly does not reveal what he actually tells him. So when you get to that conference room scene, you're never quite sure how much Eastwood is play acting versus how confused he really is. It's or a mixture of both, which of course it is. What does he tell him earlier? He's like, you're on this mission because you're an American. Which again makes sense.
Purposely withholding information from him.
Yeah, yep. and also all the way up to that point, you always see his character kind of looking around, wondering what the other characters are up to. He's suspicious of Burton at the very beginning, Smith. When Smith disappears to meet Maria, comes back, he's like looking at the other characters. He knows something's not quite right, and it's not really, as you say, until the scene in the bar that he gets some sort of inkling as to what the mission is. But then it's thrown a complete curveball by when a gun's been pointed at him, and he's forced to sit down. And I just think it's a fantastic turn in the plot, and the way that it's shot as well, the way the camera pans around as Smith tells and reveals certain things and the missions and everything else. I just think it's so well crafted.
Well, that's why I think this film is so brilliant. If you're going to single anything out, it has to be that scene, right? And this is why I think this film is a cut above a lot of its contemporaries. For as much action and violence and gunplay as there is in this film, the centerpiece of it is built entirely around dialogue and acting. It's the most important scene in the movie. It's the best scene in the movie. It's the most watchable scene in the movie. I can't tell you how many times I've watched that scene on YouTube. Everyone is perfect in it. Not just the two leads, right? All of the two German officers are great.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever seen them in anything else. I don't even know if they're German actors, but their acting is really good. And then you have the three guys that are part of their squad. They're trying to convince the German officers that they're really traitors. Oh, it's just so brilliant. And then you get, the quote unquote actor who's playing, what is it, General Barnaby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just right out of John le Carre. That's what it reminds me of. But Burton does own that scene. I mean, it's just, I know that Burton would probably consider this like a throwaway role. It really is like some of his best acting that he's ever done.
It's incredible acting. I mean, if this is him phoning it in or like him on like a meh day, like, geez, if only a lot of the actors nowadays could have an ounce of his skill.
There's the one part, he's right in the middle of his like story. He's bullshitting everyone in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you guys caught this. He just pauses to like take a sip of the cognac, and he swirls it around. And he just smiles to himself for just like a real brief second. And you're like, damn, Burton, it's one of the all-time greats.
And what's lovely about that scene is like just when you think it's over, then the Gestapo character turns up, and then
Von
it
Hoppen.
pauses, and then like you say, Smith has got to think on his feet and just comes out with this outrageous plot.
He doesn't miss a beat.
The amount of tension that I felt in this film just because of moments like that was amazing. Just because it moved quickly enough that you do think, like, how are they going to get out of this? And it's just incredible dialogue. I mean, the delivery of it too, it just feels so, again, just very authentic, so real.
He casts just enough doubt that you really do start to question his motives. And you can see that everyone at the table is trying to poke holes in his story, and he has a counter for everything. Yeah. They really do start to believe him because they're like, this gives him like 3 reasons. And he's like, first of all, he's just like, what do I have to possibly gain by doing this? And they're like, I don't know. Like what? Yeah. It's the brilliance of his acting. Like prime Russell Crowe. Crowe always reminded me of Burton.
This is going to sound weird, but I kind of feel like I could totally see Quentin Tarantino just looking at this film and being like, I want to cast Leo and Brad Pitt as the leads in my version of this film.
I'd love to see it.
Because I feel like there are so many qualities of like each character that I see in the different films that, Tarantino has made with both of those actors where I'm like, I could see that fitting.
So Anton, I'm so jealous that you got to see this for the first time recently. You must have been just riveted in this scene.
So good.
There's no music. It doesn't kick in until the Colonel's going through the empty notebook.
Mm-hmm.
And his lower jaw's quivering when he realizes he's been bluffed.
The best part for me, I crack up every time when Von Happen comes in. Paul, you were starting to get to this earlier, and he just pivots and he's like, it's perfectly simple, Major. The lieutenant and I have just discovered a plot to assassinate the Fuhrer. It's unbelievable. Is this like the greatest bullshitting you've ever seen in a movie?
It's some of the best. It's just literally some of the best. And again, this is why Tarantino was so inspired by this. What other film about World War II featured some bullshitting?
His very own. Anton, do you know offhand, did he publicly speak about this film? Because he had to have been influenced by this. There's no way he couldn't have been.
I was looking through to see if there were any interviews where he mentions. I didn't find any, but
there's no way he wasn't influenced by this.
Like
film.
It's nuts. Like it is just kind of amazing how you can clearly see how much this film influences Inglourious Basterds.
It's one of the all-time great movie bluffs. He double bluffs. He triple bluffs. He just completely bullshits his way through it.
He does a bluff pump fake.
The other piece of it, I mentioned the actors who play the German officers. What also sells the scene is they're not dumb. It's not like he's just tricking a bunch of morons. They're questioning everything he says, but he's able to back up everything. He gets on the phone. He makes them get on the phone with what's that guy's name? Wilhelm Werner. That guy manages to be hilarious for being on screen for 30 seconds.
Well, and that's why it's such good writing, is that a lesser film would have made the Nazis as bumbling idiots, but if you make them more capable, it kind of sells the tension of the situation.
And the film is smart enough to give us an earlier scene. I feel like a lesser movie would not include the earlier scene where Major von Hoppen and what's the guy's, Colonel Kramer, is that his name?
Mhm.
They get into an argument and it establishes they don't like each other. They don't trust each other. Von Hoppen thinks that Kramer has been trying to sabotage his career so that later in the conference room scene, or what is it, a dining hall, whatever, the great hall, whatever room it is. Anyway,
So
when Von Hoppen comes in and has them all at gunpoint, normally you'd be thinking like, well, he's just another German officer. Like, why wouldn't he just believe them? But it is the film very intelligently establishes early on he has a conflict with these guys. He has no reason to believe them.
And you can see it in his eyes. It's so well acted as well. Like he's confused. He doesn't now know who to trust. And Smith then sort of approaches him with the books, and I've got the names, and he's like, yeah, bring it over. And that was his demise, ultimately. But that wouldn't have occurred if he hadn't believed, he was thrown by what was going on. The throwaway thing by Smith about the assassination attempt, as you say, the conflicts with the colonels, it all brought it all together. It was fantastically well done.
Anton, do you think this is a deliberate reference to Red Skull from Captain America, Johann Schmidt?
I think it's pretty on the nose, but plus like opening like in a castle.
There's one quibble I have with the plot. So the three double agents, you're just killing them immediately. There's no way you're bringing them with you.
No. Because, like as we see in the film, there are times when they're put in peril because they get free, right? And all your mission's successful. You've got the names. You just want to get out. You would not leave them behind. I mean,
No, you're shooting all three of them in the head.
Yeah. There's nothing to be gained.
Because it kind of gives us the only dumb moment in the film when the one guy fakes the ankle injury and he dupes Schaefer and then gets taken hostage. And then, like, you never want Clint Eastwood to look like a dumbass.
I kind of wonder if it's just now the film never kind of felt like it was too brutal in any sense, but I do feel like decisions were very fatalistic. I feel like maybe there was some sort of like writing decision on why not take out, because they're essentially then prisoners of war at that point, right?
Yeah.
And like I think like that's just kind of more of like a political or just kind of like a very conscious decision not to show them taking them out, even though it just makes more sense.
It does give us the cable car sequence, which is pretty cool.
So cool. Yeah, cable cars and Bavarian castles, very Wolfenstein.
Yeah.
I wonder where they got their influence from.
Yeah.
It gave me very serious On Her Majesty's Secret Service vibes.
Yeah.
But I think we were talking about earlier, Pat, about the stunts of this film. Absolutely outrageous in terms of health and safety. These guys were on these cable cars very high up without any safety harnesses.
Yeah, there's a lot of people falling in this film.
And they fell for real. That was a moving cable car into the river. But weirdly, I read that they filmed that bit in the summer, or it was a warmer, so they didn't have the snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They used foam as snow.
The practical effects. I mean, we're kind of getting into the next reason.
Yeah,
let's
pause on that real quick. This is a question for you, Anton. This is plot related. When they finally get on the plane at the end, did you forget that there's a final piece to the puzzle?
I did.
It's a good payoff, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so fun. I feel like the way that this film ends, it just doesn't. Again, it satisfies the plot. It satisfies the viewer for kind of having followed along and gone through all the deception, and then it doesn't draw it out either, right?
No. 2 or 3 minutes, and it's all wrapped up. Now you're guessing, Smith.
Yeah.
You say, no guesswork, Colonel. You're pointing that gun at me as sufficient evidence. Like, Burton he says all this stuff so brilliantly. He's like, you are pointing it at me, aren't you?
Yeah.
And it's also a very British end. It's like, a public trial would be embarrassing for the Secret Service. And it's like, can you give me another option? It's a classic English thing.
Yeah.
What does he say? If you want it.
Yes. And he thanks him. He says, thank you. And off he goes.
And off he goes.
Fascinating.
And then they all just fall asleep. I love it.
That's Richard Wymark, I believe. Is that his name? Patrick Wymark?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another good underrated role. Haven't seen him in a lot of other stuff. He plays that real well. It's not easy to match Richard Burton in a scene.
Mm.
I can only
Yeah.
imagine how intimidating he must have been on set.
But I think he was a classical actor as well, so I think he'd
Yeah.
been in a lot of stuff. So I'm sure he could match him beat for beat.
What would have been more intimidating, his acting prowess, or you weren't sure if he'd drinking 4 or 5 bottles of vodka?
Do you think they tried to get in most of his lines like before the second or third bottle?
Or is it more just let him cook?
Maybe. Do you think he was sneaking it, hiding it as like water, and he's just like, "Oh, I just need another sip."
There's no doubt. Like
Just drinking straight vodka.
If you're drinking that much, and he's just taking for him to quench his thirst is probably just another swig.
I know we're joking about it. Like, it's not funny, but it's also kind of funny.
Yeah, no, I literally can't do that. I'm pretty sure I would die.
It would kill most people. I mean, it did kill him eventually. Because
Yeah.
what was he? He wasn't even. He was like 58 when he died or something.
Yeah, I think though. I mean, it's just kind of this sadness of the situation. It's just he worked up to it, right? Like lifelong drinker,
Mhm.
and you really do see it in Exorcist too. Like how bad. Like he's just sweating real bad in every scene.
Awful. Didn't help that
but
the movie sucked too.
But it can't help if your friends are like Richard Harris, Peter O'Toole, etc.
Yeah.
I'm sure Peter O'Toole, night out on the town, going hard.
He must have slowed down though, because he lived to be pretty old. Oh no, because we talked about him on Troy, Anton. He was drunk on set for that in the 2000s.
Yeah, no, Peter O'Toole always went hard. I wouldn't be shocked if he was if he was drunk at the Academy Awards, in like 2006.
Not surprising.
Getting nominated for
Venus.
Kind
of amazing he never won a competitive Oscar.
Mm.
Richard Burton did, I believe, right?
1 sec. Puppy is looking like he's getting in something he shouldn't. I'll be right back.
Okay. Paul, can we Google this? Did Richard Burton win an Oscar?
Oscar-wise, he was just nominated.
Really? He never won?
No, The Row, Beckett, Spy Came In From the Cold, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Anne of 1,000 Days, and Equus.
Who did he lose to for Beckett? Rex Harrison for My Fair Lady? Okay. Well, that was wrong.
George, I think she's got it.
Oh, Rex Harrison.
Well, when have the Oscars ever got it right?
Sometimes they do. A lot of times they don't. Yeah, Anton, Richard Burton never won a competitive Oscar either. Kind of seems amazing.
I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked. How many times have they gotten wrong?
A lot. Yeah, a lot.
How many times do they give an award because it's a pity award? How many times have they messed it up? Way too many times. Yeah, it's just I'm not.
Yeah, remember, Paul, on The Spy Who Loved Me, Marvin Hamlish got nominated for Best Original Score for that film, but like none of John Barry's scores were ever nominated. It's like, how?
How? What a crime.
Okay. Anton is once again leaving us because his dog is a menace. Shout out to Huey, the dog, friend of the show.
How's Winston?
He's a menace.
A menace to the Nazis.
He would be. You're right.
I did actually meet Peter O'Toole once.
Really? Was he drunk?
Probably. He was a very tall gentleman. That's all I remember. And John Mills, because it was basically an event it was a memorial for Ralph Richardson, the British actor.
Oh, yeah.
So we had Peter O'Toole, John Mills was there. He was a lot shorter. He shouted at me.
John Mills?
Yeah. It was like he needed a light for his cue cards, and I couldn't find one quick enough.
Oh.
So he had a right old pop.
How dare you?
I know.
Anton, you good with the dog?
Crisis averted. He did not shit in the house.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Something to celebrate.
Yeah.
Number 2 reason, the production. What's cool about this movie is it works doubly as an espionage film and as an action film. If you don't want to pay attention to the plot, you can just watch it for the action scenes, which are great.
Mm-hmm.
If you do want to pay attention to the plot, which I recommend that you do, I mean, we just spent a good 20 minutes talking about the plot. It's complicated, but it really holds up. I think if you want to get a bit nitpicky, this is something we talked about a bit in the intro. It's not what you would call a realistic World War II movie. It's more of an action movie with like a World War II backdrop, but who cares?
No, I mean, if you look at it realistically, I mean, the scene in the hallway where they're trying to radio back to base and Clint, the Schaefer character is trying to defend the position, and all of a sudden he gets like a pair of MP40s and starts tearing at the Nazis in the corridor, or the Everlong potato masher. that just lays there for what seems like forever, and at other times seems to just go off at the. You can't look at it like that, as you say. It's an action adventure. You can't. It's not anchored in reality as such.
I should have asked ChatGPT, did this movie invent dual wielding?
Clint Eastwood dual wielding
MP40s?
those MP40s. Pretty
Shout
sweet.
out to the MP40, which is one of, if not the best submachine gun in any Call of Duty game ever.
BJ Blazkowicz in Castle Wolfenstein used it quite a lot, if I remember rightly.
Yep.
That's right.
Or should I say I used it quite a lot. Trying to reenact the scenes. And the other point was that it was actually one of the first films I actually saw like a wall slowly being destroyed by all the bullet holes. Usually most action sequences you see a little puff of smoke or something like that, but nothing actually really got destroyed. And all of a sudden you could see the back of the wall slightly falling apart with all the bullet holes.
Taking chunks out of it.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant.
We mentioned the runtime. It's 155 minutes. I think it's really well paced. I was going to say a modern version of this would do it shorter, but Anton, I don't know. We talk about this a lot, how a lot of newer movies are long.
Yeah, they're long, and I feel like even then, this is just so well paced that it doesn't feel long, which is good.
Got to give a lot of credit to the director, Brian Hutton, for this, as well as the editors. There is not a ton of action in the first half. It's a lot of dialogue, a lot of silence. There's a lot of just like characters walking to and from various locations when they're in the woods, even when they're in the village. The camera lingers on them walking from building to building quite a bit, but there's a lot of tension because the underlying threat of them being discovered sells it all. It's definitely a slow burn in the first half. We get, there's a brief flurry of activity when they have to escape after they get arrested. When Clint Eastwood's character Schaefer just pretends to tie a shoe, which is just hilarious. They just let him do it in the front seat. It's pretty funny.
I have a question for both of you, actually, when we're talking about if this was ever remade today. After kind of watching Alien Romulus, the amount of exposition and the way that they kind of indicated constantly, oh, I'm going to linger on this particular tool or this particular screen, and you're going to see the reason why in about 30 seconds. Do you think they would hold the same level of plot devices and things like that and allow you to kind of have to think about what's going on? Do you think they might be too much trying to pace it ahead of itself?
I think it depends who's making the film.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I feel like I can trust a filmmaker. I'm not going to trust anyone that ever made the film Dragon Ball Evolution. I don't know why, but that movie's just top of mind.
Oh,
but
boy.
like even like someone like Neil Blomkamp, who I've just seen a few more of his films recently, does a really good job of, you have enough exposition that it feels well within the context of the story, but nothing's over explained. And I feel like even thinking about Oppenheimer, not a ton of exposition in that film either, other than what's kind of naturally going through the progression of the storyline. So there are
good
examples.
exposition.
Yeah, there's really good examples of like how is it kind of naturally within the story.
Not like that terrible exposition in Alien Romulus.
Or even a Ferrari. I think like that is kind of a polar opposite of not enough context. So films are not afraid to not give any context, apparently.
But I suppose those films that you reference, Anton, they tend to be quite serious, if you like, kind of thought-provoking films. This is more of an adventure, almost in the kind of Alien Romulus sort of
Yeah, no, I see
way.
what you're saying.
Do you know what I mean? Because you're trying to appeal to a broader audience.
Well, I was going to say less, direct reference. We talked about the movie even in this episode, Inglourious Bastards, I think does a really good job of that. I mean, there is a lot of course, whether it's the aesthetic, the plot elements, a few of the characters definitely are drawn from this film, but I think one of the key things is just how do you properly tell a story without slogging it through with too much exposition. I feel like Inglourious Bastards, even from the very beginning, the tension throughout is not necessarily given. It's thoroughly earned and through the tension of the film. So just another example.
And just to say what a great pod that was on Alien Romulus.
Thank you.
Did we trash it enough?
No, I think you needed to roll over it at least 3 more times.
Okay.
Look, I didn't think it was a terrible movie, but I have no interest in ever watching it again.
Yeah, I don't see the point of rehashing the same thing and just with a new badge on it. It just seems a complete waste of everyone's time. Just go and watch the originals because you see the beats on those two films far more entertaining. Why just turn into a bunch of kids doing the same thing in one film? And some
Paul,
of it was just so out of anyway, I'm rambling now because I'm on my
I
high
was going to say,
horse.
Paul, it's because we're not soulless movie executives. That's why. Oh.
Very well said.
Back to the plot of Where Eagles Dare.
Yeah.
First half is a slow burn. A lot of tension when they're getting into the castle. Once they have the information they came for and they have to get out of the castle, the action starts and it's pretty much nonstop for the next 45 minutes to an hour. It's relentless. Anytime there's action in snow, I'm like a little bit more invested. We've talked about this on the various Bond movies that we've covered, Anton. Any time that Bond is doing like snow-based action, it's just a little bit cooler.
Yeah, I think is it just the aesthetic, you think? It just seems really cool.
Yeah. I mean, the whole alpine mountaintop castle fortress, like that's just awesome.
Yep. Agree with that.
Every time I watch this movie, I marvel at how well the set pieces hold up. They're really well staged. This film is approaching 60 years old. It's clearly an older film, but I think all the action holds up. Apart from if you want to get real nitpicky, there's a couple shots here or there with the rear projection. Doesn't bother me. Everything is just staged really well. It's again something we talk about a lot with action, spatial geography. You have a pretty good layout of the castle and where they need to get to and where they need to get out. It establishes where the cable cars are. You have everything centered around like the courtyard. You're never really confused when they're going from one part of the castle to another. It's very clear that they thought out the logistics of everything when they were planning this film, the action in here. And even going back to the first half of the film, right? The way they disable the radio, the way they plan all the explosives. So at the end, when they're trying to get away and they blow up the trees and the telephone poles, then they take out all the planes on the runway. It's like every single thing gets thought out.
And you said it best even before I did the watch through for the first time. Every single scene has a purpose. Nothing is wasted.
I actually think it's the template for. I think we talked earlier about for like games. The video games that we play today. If you look at the beats of the film, you've got to get into the castle.
Right.
You then get captured. You've got to escape. Then you still got to get into the castle. You get into the castle. You retrieve the information. Now you've got to get out, but you've already planted the explosives. So there's now a time issue to get out. And then you've got to hit the radio operator and get the signal out. Then you get it onto the cable cast. But oh no, you've got to kill those two guys. There's all these little beats all the way through, and then finally you get into the bus, and then you've got to hit the poles. Then you got to get it on the plane with all these troops come. I mean, the scenes in like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, they're the same beats. It's literally the template for modern computer games. It's. I think that's why it works so well.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's so fun being a video game fan and seeing a film like this and just knowing that, like you said, beat for beat, this is not only a great story structure, but a great video game level structure.
Do you think they could make this movie now?
They could, but they don't make films like this anymore.
No, they're always gritty. Right?
Yeah, if you're making a World War II film, it has to be gritty. It has to show you the horrors of war. You have to make Fury is just very depressing.
Why does gritty and realistic and depressing have a monopoly on war movies now? I'm, again, not saying we don't need to treat war movies as a joke. We keep mentioning Inglourious Bastards. That's probably the closest thing that I can think of recently where Tarantino, I think very wisely created like an alternative fictional version of World War II. Because otherwise, like, how are you going to make jokes about it?
The other side of it was Jojo Rabbit, right? With Taika Waititi. And that even then, the comedy used for the backdrop was really more of a satire of just the darkness of the time. I mean, it's not just war films, though. Like, literally everything has to have a darker tone to it. Like, look at the Star Wars franchise. For some reason, even Jedi have to have a dark nuance to it that you can't just enjoy Jedi anymore.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That's right, because Pat denies that Disney still does Star Wars.
It's not Star Wars as far as I'm concerned. It's just some fan fiction made by committee. If you like it, you like it, but if it's not Star Wars.
Believe me, I am not enjoying it. But suffice to say, it's...
Same template, you're right.
Yeah.
What we have
Similar
here
template.
is them sneaking into the Death Star.
Mm.
How many
Yeah.
movies of Eastwood and Burton stabbing, shooting, and blowing up hundreds of Nazis could you watch? 3 more?
Ooh, I would definitely see the 22 Jump Street of this. Yeah.
22 Jump Street.
Like, let's do the same thing, bigger budget.
All right. I don't know if either of you already looked this up. And if you did, just pretend. How many people do you think Eastwood's character Schaefer kills in this movie?
A lot.
80.
According to IMDb, it's 73. So you're close.
Wow.
Yeah.
The body count is over 100, according to IMDb, which is, they lost track.
Yeah. I think it's the dual wielding. It's very effective.
It's so awesome and ridiculous. They really are in top form. Burton's doing his thing. I like that bit that we read about how Eastwood just gave away lines, but that's okay because Eastwood is super comfortable with silence.
It's funny because I don't necessarily think of Burton as like a action film force.
No.
I do see Eastwood more in that sense of just like the believability of him to kind of go in the scene and like fight his way through to like achieve his goal. But I think that the film did a really good job of complementing both of their skill sets and then maximizing basically to their strengths, right? I think that even just kind of segue where this point is going is even in their points in their career, they really did have that brand. For Eastwood, it's like he's a bad dude, and of course he's going to kill 100 Nazis, but then also very well known for wanting to do his own stunts. The scene where they're both by rope just kind of scaffolding up. Clint Eastwood actually looks haggard because he was actually pulling himself by rope up the mountain. And of course, now Richard Burton looked like it was fully by ease. It's not because of the drinking. He did have a pulley system helping him get up there. They both had their brand, and I think this film just complemented them perfectly with it.
Burton had done a similar role to this a couple years before in The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. So he certainly had some experience doing this kind of thing. Now, he's certainly having a lot more fun with it here, but Anton, you nailed it. Like, they just complement each other so well. You don't think of Burton as an action guy, and he just leaves most of the action to Eastwood, and that works really well.
The fact that I think with Burton it was believable that he would just kill someone in a heartbeat, but he wasn't going to like shoot thousands of Nazis, but he could look someone in the eye and shoot them. He had that believability, and I think if Eastwood's character had more dialogue, I think it would have imbalanced the film, because Burton, Smith was the character that knew what was going on. He knew the plan. He knew how he was going to get out of it, and Schaefer was the one that was kind of being dragged along and was just kind of witness to it all, and it was having to react. So I think that was really represented in the dialogue balance as well.
Maybe it was a good decision on Eastwood's part because he was in like early director mode. He was just thinking about the dialogue. I'm reading into this quite a bit here, but you never know.
Or maybe, is it the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
Maybe, because I could totally see it being the other way too. Like,
yeah. Or he's just like, this is stupid. I don't want these lines.
It's like, I'm going to get in directing because I don't want to read these lines.
All the supporting performances are great. I was talking about the guys who play the German officers. Mary Uri, what's her name? How do you say her last name?
I think.
Mary She's awesome. Total badass, like we were talking about before. She more than holds her own. Ingrid Pitt, she's gorgeous. Haven't seen her in a lot of other stuff.
She's your Hammer House of Horror type person, so that's where she got her most famous roles.
So the guy that plays Kramer, for basically my entire life, I thought it was the actor Paul Freeman who plays Belloc in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They look really similar, but no, they're just two totally different people. You're thinking about it now, aren't you? You're like, they do. They do look the same. We get monocled, Nazi general, but he's not the most evil Nazi. The most evil Nazi is the standout for me. Darren Nesbitt as Major von Hoppen. When I think of Aryan-looking Nazi villains, this is the guy that I think of. The very second we see his character on screen, you know he's going to be a problem later on.
And I always thought he was German, but he's a quintessentially English guy.
Yeah.
With just a great range. And he sells that so well, especially when he starts to suspect something's not right. And after the whole, left side, right side cathedral piece, and he escorts Maria back to her room, and then he's like, something isn't quite right. But he doesn't say anything. It's just his acting, just fantastic.
I have a bit about his uniform. All I will say is that a black SS uniform would have been very, very rare in World War II. That was a pre-war thing. That's your history lesson for the day. Anton, did you think von Hoppen was going to be pursuing them to the very end?
I can't say that I would have expected it.
In a way, I think the film subverts expectations by the way he's killed off.
Mm-hmm.
When I first saw the movie, I remember this very vividly as a kid. You think he's the bad guy of the movie. He's going to be chasing them all the way to the end. And it's like, no, Schaefer just makes quick work of him.
Because I feel like, the movie, as you said, it subvert expectations in a very satisfying way.
Quotable movie. We talked about Broadsword calling Danny boy. You know who likes this movie? Spielberg. Said it's one of his favorite World War II movies. A man of taste.
I could see elements of this in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, for sure. Line that Burton says.
Oh, it's not the disguise one, is it? Where Heidi's been here for. I can't remember what the line is, but it's something like he basically looks at a dress and says, "Oh, what a disguise." Remember that one?
I have to look this up now. I apologize for the pause. Here's the line. She goes, "Why couldn't you have supplied some hot water bottles or an electrically heated suit? I thought you loved me." And he says, "I can't help what you think." That made me chuckle.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what do we think of the score?
Oh, perfect.
Snare drums.
The way it just opens with that to just let you know, like, this is business.
Yeah. It's like Alpine horns. It's great stuff. It's basically the same theme throughout, but they speed it up, they slow it down, they do it with action, they do it with drama. It's a great score. Very memorable. Paul, do you want to complain about the helicopter?
Yeah. So if as you said earlier, Pat, if you want to nitpick, I would say my only bit that I really still don't like is when the helicopter comes into the film. I feel like it's like a scene out of MASH as it lands, and I just think it's like so out of place. And they kind of sell it, which is fine, and I can set it aside. But it's just one of the things in this film that just irks me. And they knew at the time that it was, it wasn't around during that period, but I guess they thought, no, it looks cool, let's include it. So I have to sort of step back and just let it ride.
Have you ever seen footage of the experimental helicopters that were developed by Germany during World War II?
No. They looked very silly.
They did. You know what? The Osprey now, Paul? They look kind of like that.
Right.
With the twin rotors.
Yeah.
But obviously a lot goofier. Yeah, I'm with you on the helicopter, but it is what it is. We talked about just the actors in this and why it all works. The effects. This is one of the earliest uses of blue screen in a film. Blue screen would have been pretty new technology then. And I have to say, a lot of the rear projection stuff, like in the bus towards the end of the film, looks good. There's also some effects in here where I am still not quite sure how they did it. Paul, we were chatting about this before this recording. Anton, I don't know if you noticed this too. Some of the car flips, I'm not really sure how they did it. They must have used dummies, because if they were full-size cars, it would have killed all the occupants. If it's miniature work, it looks great. I'm talking about the car that flips over and goes over the cliff right before the bridge. And then there's another one that flips over on the runway at the end when Burton and Eastwood are machine gunning it. It looks like a full-size car, and it's just really well done.
I was going to say, I think from what I've seen from behind-the-scenes footage of, in general, for, very similar scenes, it's just intercut with... that's just the movie magic. You do have a roll cage, but at the same time, you kind of break away at the right moment. There's not actually someone in the car when it's going down the hill.
Yeah.
But the one at the airport, if I remember rightly, it took such a sharp pivot to go flip over, and it really does look like there are drivers in there. There is a scene. There is one where it bursts into flames, and you kind of see that there are dummies in there. Yeah. But there's one where it flips over, and I thought, sure, it looked like a driver in there.
I'm sure there were definitely quite a few stunt people that had brushes with the afterlife, but I think It kind of reminds me of, what is it? Some of the exploding planes on Tora Tora Tora.
Yeah, it's good call out. Yeah, I'm sure there was a little dicey on set with some of the stunts.
But hey, it's Hollywood, baby.
I've
Well, I
been to
think it.
Germany many times. I am so mad at myself that I have never gone to this castle.
I feel like that would have been like on your list for sure.
I don't know how it wasn't.
It's not in Austria, isn't it? The
It's in
castle.
Bavaria.
It's in Bavaria.
Yeah, some of this movie was filmed
Yeah.
in Austria, to your
Right,
point,
yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
that castle is in Germany. It's like I'm like getting mad thinking about it, like why I haven't been here, because it looks like a great place to visit.
And I'm sure there's probably a tour as well that you could go on
Yeah,
around
of
the
course.
castle. Yeah, I know.
This movie needs a 4K restoration.
It's shocking.
It's not great looking.
It's something from the sort of, I would say, probably late 90s, early 2000s transfer.
I have it on Blu-ray, and the back of the box says 1080p, but it looks like 720 to me. It's nothing impressive. It has nothing to do with how the movie's shot, but I think you're right, Paul. It's just not a very good transfer.
No, there's a lot of noise compression on it.
Yeah.
Artifacts on there as well. I think the one I've watched on TV actually seemed to be a cleaner version of it, but it's still full of film marks and damage and things like that new restorations that we have today get rid of. And
Right.
to go back to the original negs, I think it warrants a new release.
I figure this film would have a Criterion Collection
It should.
edition.
Should we start a petition and just get it done?
Get the viewers in.
I don't know how we would go about that, but
put it in the link.
Yeah, listeners, if you want a Criterion Collection edition of this film, write in and tell the Criterion Collection why.
There is the Blu-ray version, but it's not the Criterion Collection. It's looking like last word was in 2022. There was going to be a remastered 4K release, and then that just like lost steam.
What are you going to do?
Start a petition.
Yep.
We're going to go on change.org.
All right. Anything to add before we wrap this up? Have we gushed about this enough?
Let's give our verdict.
All right. Paul, as the guest, would you like to go first and give your rating?
Yes, please. I absolutely love this film, as you probably can tell throughout this podcast. And I certainly want this to reach a wider audience. And to this day, I still don't understand why it's not being recognised as one of those great adventure epics that come out of Hollywood. The way that it was shot, the really deep and complex plots, the different ways that they were escaping out of the castle, makes it a very almost British classic. Yet, despite the long running time, you never felt that anything was really wasted. As you say, Pat, Burton and Eastwood were just such a brilliant double act. Their chemistry really works, and with the dialogue and the often confused look on Eastwood really sold the plot. And Brian Hunt, the director, he did Kelly's Heroes, but if you look at that film, which is another film I really love, it's very much anchored in the 60s in terms of style and music, whereas this one, I think it's just got such a timeless quality to it. And I would just definitely recommend anyone that I ever meet to watch this film. I love it. It's a rewatch. I could watch it almost every day. Just love it. And for me, this is my A+ type of film. So there you go.
Anton, I want to hear your take first.
This is a film that I cannot recommend enough. How do I put this? It is so surprising in the best way possible because of the timelessness, because of it's just very well done in the way that you can lose yourself in the film that doesn't necessarily fit like one set genre. And I feel like that versatility to me is like the sign of a great movie. And it's a great example also of a film that doesn't necessarily need to stick to too serious of a tone to be able to show you acting chops, well-written story, dedication to practical effects, but also special effects. Overall, just really tons of classic Hollywood movie magic in this. And it's because of all of that I feel like there's so much just high quality and merit that any movie fan today will absolutely enjoy being able to go back and see this film. It is so much fun. I can't believe that it's taken me this long to see it. I just really, really enjoy this film. And whether you're a history buff, a fan of the actors in this film, or even just a fan of film, like if you're a fan of just movies, like do yourself a favor, go watch this film. There's really not much to nitpick with this, and the biggest reason again of like why this film wasn't better, like let's just get it out there, like people just need to watch it. I think that's the biggest thing. So let's make sure that more and more people can see this film today. I'm definitely on the train of getting this on change.org for a Blu-ray restoration of this movie. I'm giving it a resounding A.
What'd you give it, Paul?
I gave it the top mark.
A plus?
Absolutely, yeah. Because I've got no... my judgment is totally skewed by
It's okay.
my love of this film. So despite its little kinks, if I keep going back to it, surely there's something there that I just love.
Well, the more I see it, the more I like it. This is an absolute must-see. I said it before, I'll say it again. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Echoing everything the two of you just said. I mean, Richard Burton, he's all-time great here. He's magnetic. Eastwood is equally impressive. The action is top-notch. It's a great espionage plot with plenty of intrigue, all set against the backdrop of Alpine, snow-capped World War II commando stuff. What more could you ask for? It's top tier for me. It really is underappreciated. I hope anyone listening, if you haven't seen it, check it out on Apple Plus or wherever this is going to be available by the time this episode comes out. Those who have seen it think very highly of it, but not enough people seem to know it. Hopefully this episode can help with that even a tiny bit. A plus for me. Top tier. You knew that was coming. Well, that is it for Where Eagles Dare. Paul, it is always a pleasure having you on, especially for a film that we all love.
Yeah, I feel like I've gone from the deepest, darkest places with like films like Alien 3. Now we're on the peak, and I guess it's only downward from there for the moment. But for this moment, I shall enjoy and relish. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course. We are going to have you back soon. I don't know what for, but we'll think of one.
I look forward to it. And to all the other podcasts. They've been so good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Anton, anything to add before we end this?
I think that this is the perfect movie to cleanse yourself if you've seen a bad movie.
A palate cleanser, if you will.
Yeah.
We've covered some bad movies recently.
Yeah.
Next week's episode is a Netflix original film, which will be new, unless it gets delayed again. Back in Action. It's a little surprise episode that we're releasing. It's already been delayed once, so by the time this episode comes out, take this with a grain of salt. You may not hear it at all. But yeah, we're very quickly wrapping up season 6 here, Anton.
Yeah, and Back in Action, that's going to be interesting because I think everyone's been clamoring for more Cameron Diaz.
Yeah. So we'll see. Unless I hope it doesn't get delayed again because I'm semi looking forward to it.
I am not trying to be too pessimistic, but I do think sure, why not Cameron Diaz? Let's do it.
Yeah, sure. We like Cameron Diaz. Well, that's it for this week's edition of Why Wasn't It Better? If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a follow or a 5-star review. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. As always, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. For those who would like to support us directly, we have a Patreon. Links are in the description. Thanks for listening and see you next time.